Welcome to the RE Human Layer Security podcast, the show that flips the script on cybersecurity. I'm Tim Sadler, the CEO and co-founder of Tessian, and in each episode, I'll be interviewing IT and business leaders about why we need to protect people, not just machines and data, to stop breaches and empower businesses to achieve their missions. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the RE Human Layer Security podcast. This week, I'm joined by Simon Hodgkinson, the former Group Chief Information Security Officer at BP, and currently an advisor and Senior Development Director for Alliance ACSN. With over 35 years of experience in the IT and security space, Simon has been committed to bettering employees' IT experience and making lasting improvements in employees' cybersecurity behaviours, something I'm really keen to discuss with him today. Simon, thanks for joining us today. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Tim. Look forward to the discussion.
So, Simon, you've been working in IT and security for just over 35 years now. How much has the industry changed, I guess, both from a threat landscape perspective, but also in relation to the role that the CISO now plays?
Well, at the start of my career, cybersecurity wasn't a thing. So it's dramatically changed. Cyber attacks did occur in the 1980s, but they were few and far between. So roll forward 35 years, it's now a daily occurrence, regularly in the mainstream press. Organizations, public, private sector, consistently experiencing cyber attacks, and sadly, many organizations have been compromised. I mean, there's various reports out there now. The cost of cyber crime will exceed $2 trillion in 2020. I've read one report that said $6 trillion. But a recent report from the Department of Culture and Media in the UK reported almost half of businesses, so 46%, and a quarter of charities have had cyber breaches or attacks in the last 12 months. So with that context, the role of the CISO is dramatically changed. It shouldn't be buried in the IT organization. In my view, it should be minimally a peer to the CIO and the chief digital officers now. It should have regular access to executive leadership teams, the C-suite, and should be regularly on every company's board agenda, given this is an existential threat to every company. I've got to say, it's sad to say it's not at the moment. There's still many organizations where the CISO is buried in the IT organization. But yeah, it's dramatically changed him.
And do you think, did the security industry, or what was the security industry, maybe people in IT who were practicing security, did anybody see this coming, or has this taken us all by surprise?
Well, I think through the years, the visibility of the attacks has increased. I remember back to the early 2000s, some pretty substantial cyber attacks. And as organizations started to develop capability, but it's still very much embedded in the IT organization. And I don't think we really value the human side of cybersecurity. It was always in the domain of deep technologists throwing technology at a problem. So yeah, I think there's an element that as cybercrime expanded exponentially, that organizations were somewhat caught out, and it was probably only the sort of top organizations in the world or organizations under very severe regulatory regimes that are really got well positioned to respond to that.
And I guess why, you cited some pretty alarming statistics just about how prevalent the risk is for organizations today. This might be a silly question, but why is that? Like, why is this happening? Why is the level of threat so high? Why is the loss due to attacks increasing and increasing? What are the trends underlying this?
So my simple view of the world is actually cybercrime tends to be very low cost of entry, very low risk of being apprehended, and pretty high reward. So if you had a business where it was low cost of entry, low risk and high reward, you're going to get people who want to be part of that. And I think that whole adversary threat actor community has just expanded rapidly. I also think cybercrime has entered, it has a different threat actors now. So, it's now in the realms of very highly sophisticated nation states, very highly sophisticated cyber criminals, equally terrorist groups, activist groups, but equally in the domain of sort of the commodity criminal, if you like. And the volume of attacks is just enormous now, and people at a very low cost can spray out attack across a very vast landscape, pretty much no cost. The organizations that are trying to defend themselves have to be right 100% of the time. The threat actors only have to be right once. It's an unfair fight. If you let your guard down for one moment, you're compromised. So it's I think it's a combination of that. But equally, when you look at the changing landscape, digital assets is just continues to expand exponentially as well. When I started on a mainframe with green screen technology. 35 years on, roughly 2/3 of the world now have some form of mobile device. You think about the expansion of IoT devices. And security in that realm is still very, very rudimentary. I think there was an attack recently on cameras that has impacted some pretty significant organizations because the security is just not built into the product. More and more software is being created. With more software comes more vulnerabilities, and then you've got obviously the threat actors that we talked about, they're expanding. So if you consider risk to be a combination of asset threats and vulnerabilities, well, the risk is increasing dramatically all of the time.
And I wanted to go back to one of the points you mentioned earlier, which was the role of the CISO. And actually the CISO should be reporting to the board, should be a peer to the CIO and the chief digital officer. It would be good to hear your thoughts on how the role of the security leader in an enterprise has changed over the past decade. I guess, from the point where the CISO actually became a thing, how have things changed since then, and where are we today? And then, where do you see that role going as we move forward from here?
Yeah, so I think the creation of the CISO was a very technical response to the problem. So they're very much focused on the IT side, as we talked about. The role of the CISO is just enormous now. So if you think about the whole behavioral and cultural change that you need, there is no technology that can eradicate cyber risk. So you've got to invest in people. This is as much a human performance challenge as it is a technology challenge. You think about the regulatory landscape. Well, in many roles for CISOs, they're looking over the whole governance, compliance, and regulatory landscape as well. So that's a much broader discussion than purely the IT or the digital organization. The legalities of it, things like business continuity, all of these things are no longer just in the realm of what was the IT department, where the CISO was traditionally positioned. And hence my assertion that actually the CISO role is much broader than being embedded in what is a technology organization. It's interfacing with the chief legal counsel. It's interfacing with the business leaders who need to manage cyber risk. And cyber risk isn't just about technology. It's all about managing and securing the supply chain. So I think the whole role has transformed from where it was originally positioned, which was deep in the technology department, to a much broader set of accountabilities, and therefore the position should be elevated to recognise that.
And where does it go from here, do you think? We've seen this like complete step change in the concept of cybersecurity, the threat landscape. What do you predict for the next decade ahead? What do you think CISOs in 10 years' time are going to be thinking about? What do you think their role is going to be and their responsibilities are going to be?
That's a great question. So I think the responsibilities, I don't think they can get any broader, because it's just such a vast set of accountabilities that can sit under that role, just because it is an existential threat to the business, and you've got this risk growing all of the time, and therefore that conversation at board level needs to be active very, very frequently. So I think the position will continue to be elevated. The question is, how many people are going to want to be a CISO in a few years' time? Just because the volume of attacks are enormous, and it literally is a 24/7 job. When you think of the scope. The other challenge I think that's happening at the moment in the industry is a few years ago there was talk about this notion of the world becoming flat and this globalization. You're seeing a lot of isolation now in terms of privacy regulations across the globe, which makes the challenge for the CISO of defending organizations in different jurisdictions, making sure that companies are compliant with legal and regulatory obligations, increasingly difficult in a world where there's this sort of fragmentation of legal and regulatory regimes. And I think that will increase cyber risk as a result. Finally, I'd add cyber is now a proxy for all of the geopolitical tension in the world. And because cyber is a proxy for it, a lot of the attacks that were in the mainstream press, the WannaCries and not patches, and to a degree, things like SolarWinds, they're all stemming from geopolitical tensions in the world, and they break out of that realm, which wouldn't happen necessarily in the physical in the physical world and tension there, i.e. warfare. But in the cyber world, those tools are breaking out, and they're the things that are impacting companies. And so you see largely collateral damage. So you've got these massively sophisticated threat actors out there, adversaries out there that have got tremendous capability in terms of the tooling that is now bleeding into the commercial and the public sector worlds, and our ability to respond to that is really, really challenged. The pace is just extraordinary.
I wanted to shift gears to a topic that I know is really close to your heart and the conversations that we've had, which is around the role of the human in security. The way I think about where we are in most enterprises today is we've gone through decades of digital transformation, really trying to enable and empower people to achieve more through technology. We can wire millions and millions of dollars in a few clicks. We can share our entire customer database in an Excel file on an email attachment. So we've done all of these things, but we haven't thought about how we actually secure people who are now controlling our most sensitive systems and data. And I know you have a lot of thoughts on this. So maybe you could start by just telling us, what are your thoughts on the role of the human in security? And again, where are we today? Are companies, are boards thinking enough about how do we secure the people that control our digital systems and data?
It's a great question, and I think you've got to put people at the heart of security. I mean, it's ultimately the role of security should be to sort of enable the organisation to achieve its objectives. So it follows that if your security measures aren't working for the people, then they're not working at all. And I think part of the challenge we've had historically is we've made security really hard. So for people to act in the secure way, it was difficult to do. You know, you can think back to even something like multi-factor authentication when that was first rolled out. It just made people do more things and made their life more difficult. You think about sort of secure enclaves for highly sensitive data. We just made them really difficult to get into. And we didn't think about the human factor. People just need to get their jobs done. So I actually think, it needs to this sort of notion of embedded security. So actually it's the least path of resistance for people to be able to do their job. And in many respects, if you can allow people to do their job securely without seeing security at all, that's a fantastic outcome. So things like, come back to multi-factor authentication. When people are having dual-factor, multi-factor authentication when they don't know they're doing it, that's a great win because it's securing the company, but it's allowing people to get their jobs done in the easiest way. I'll come back to the point as well, though. I don't think there is a technology, and you may convince me it's different, Tim, but I don't think there is a technology that can eradicate the cyber risk. So we need to think through the things that people are doing and make sure that we help them wherever possible. But we also add to that things like behavioural awareness and security awareness campaigns to make sure the culture is right. And I'll come to things like business email compromise. So, as people tightened up on their own security, so as organisations increase their maturity, what do the threat actors do? They go after the supply chain. So, some of the suppliers that we all use don't have the same resources to make sure they're secure. So they get breached. They then send in an email from a legitimate counterparty to somebody saying, change the bank account. It's typically 5 minutes before close of business on a day, saying the CEO's asked us to change the bank account at this time. But for all intents and purposes, that looks like it's coming from somebody in a company you expected to get that data from. And at the moment, the security software, and again, you can convince me differently, is not there to protect against those use cases. So we've got to make sure that we invest in people to make sure that they rigorously follow process. But equally, then we need to deploy the technology for the simple cases where people are emailing the wrong, you use the Excel spreadsheet. Where there's obvious things that shouldn't be occurring, technology should be deployed to solve those use cases.
So I guess I do disagree in the sense that the analogy I use is, we drive cars with assistive technology because people make mistakes.
Yeah.
We are all we're all prone to error, and I do think technology can solve this problem. I mean, not least because we're building that technology at Tessian to solve the problem of business email compromise and misdirected emails and things like that. But I think the narrative insecurity, or there is a lot of people I speak to who say the human problem cannot be solved through technology. But I question why we train people to be phishing filters but we didn't train people to be spam filters. We just invented a technology that took that problem away. Yep. And I think it comes back to what you were saying, which is actually we've actually got a responsibility as security teams and as technology companies to start abstracting this complexity of security away from people so that they can actually just do their job. And I don't think most organizations are on that wavelength right now. I think they're saying, hey, look, if we gave you the phishing simulation, we've covered our back. Now there's no excuse for not doing the right thing 100% of the time. But the crazy thing is that if you pass your driving test, no one would say, don't worry about your seatbelt. You've done the test. You're educated now. And we know that you're not going to make a mistake. What do you think leads to that kind of double standard in something that we know people make mistakes, but yet we're still trying to train them to be perfect?
Well, I think maybe it's a maturity of the software to deal with the use cases you described, because actually traditionally, even when you've deployed some pretty leading edge technology, there's always cases that get through that, because actually the threat actors are continually changing their tactics as well. So they'll keep pace with, as software matures in terms of spotting phishing. Guess what? They change their tactics to try and avoid those kind of things. And when I read a report recently that said one of the major email filtering companies said that 85% of the emails sent that was either spam or phishing. I mean, it's just extraordinary, but some of that still gets through. So I think it would be wrong, in my view, not to continue to invest in sort of raising people's awareness of what to look out for. I also think there's a good thing there as well, in the fact that if you create a really engaging awareness campaign, people can take that home. And guess what? Most of us don't have the money that organizations have to throw at security. So actually you raise broader awareness to get across your family and friends as well. And certainly when we did campaigns, we asked people to take this back to families, friends, etc., and raise people's awareness on things. So I think there is still a need to invest in people, yet actually continue to invest in advanced technologies to pretty much, where possible, get rid of the vast majority of those phishing attacks, spam attacks, business email compromise where you can, although I'd be interested in another conversation maybe offline to figure out how you fix that particular use case of the supply chain getting compromised. But that would be fascinating. So I think it's a combination of both. And as you know, as the models improve and the fidelity gets much better, and we remove more and more of that, if we were to stop investing in awareness campaigns and everybody was to say, hey, we're all safe, we don't need to worry about things anymore, I'm not sure that's the right answer either. I think that slight bit of vigilance, or that vigilance and that slight bit of paranoia is always worth thinking about. Hey, why did somebody send me this? I mean, look at vast amounts of phishing and all of that came, days after COVID became a thing. Well, maybe some of the big organizations had good defenses in place, but I'm guaranteeing lots of people in their personal lives didn't, and lots of people clicked through there. So actually, we sort of have a bit of a duty of care as well to continue to raise people's awareness what it's like to be safe online.
I agree. I think you have to do both. I think we need to be, sometimes in security, we like celebrate the complexity of the field almost to the point where we indulge in, it's complicated, so everyone's got to learn. And I think we do that a little bit too much, but I completely agree. We absolutely do also have a responsibility to make people aware of the important base level hygiene that we should all be practicing to keep ourselves safe.
Can I just pick up on that point?
Yeah, please.
About complexity as well. I think the security industry has, in many respects, been its own worst enemy. We've made the language around it so complex. So when I was talking about this should be a board level conversation, you can't talk about to the board in deep technical language. They understand risk better than most people and how to manage risk, but you've got to do it in a narrative that they can connect with. And I'm sad to say, I don't think we as security professionals have always presented it that way. So it makes it really difficult for people to engage with. And that's the same challenge at all layers in the organization. If you make it highly complex, highly technical, people are just going to turn off. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, I agree. I agree completely. You've worked for some very large organizations. You've also, you've advised many companies and seen lots of things in security. What are some of the base level things that you think every organization should be thinking about when it comes to keeping people safe, their employees safe? What do you see as kind of the common pitfalls and the things that companies are maybe most exposed to, and what can they do to take action on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I come back to the conversation about phishing. What's the latest report? You probably know this better than me, but 92% of all successful attacks start with some kind of phishing. So we've got to do the best job we can to make that a non-issue. So, stop those things coming through to people's inboxes. If people do click on them, use software to make sure that nothing bad happens. And remarkably, I was talking to somebody at Microsoft at the end of last year, and remarkably, many organizations still don't have basic hygiene in place, like multi-factor authentication. So you're just leaving yourself and your people, you're effectively exposing your people to those attacks. They should just simply not be worried about or exposed to. And if they do get, as I said, click a link, there's protections in place to make sure that's a non-issue. I mean, I think the back to business email compromise, the FBI reported $2 billion of losses in the US alone last year. So again, just doing everything we can to protect against what I would call is sort of the base level commodity type attacks, which aren't nation states necessarily. These are just commodity cyber criminals, and we shouldn't leave our people exposed to that. I think as I said, we do have a duty of care to continue to raise awareness and continue to invest in making sure that people are able to do the right thing. I think we can make it a bit more engaging than we have. So, a lot of organizations, you talked about the tick box, fish me type, let's send something through and see who clicks on it and then slap them on the wrist. That's not engaging. It doesn't necessarily work. So I think you have to make it engaging. So, try and make sure that any awareness campaigns. So we use things like, block box sets, Netflix box sets. So it just connects people to something that they enjoy watching and listening, and then gamify it a little bit. So, there's nothing like a bit of healthy competition in a healthy way, not beat people up for doing the wrong thing, but, really positively engage people in that. And then be specific. So again, if you think about a lot of compliance type training is very one size fits all, and cyber was often put in that way as well. But actually, if you've got somebody who's working in a retail station and you need to be worried about skinning point of sale systems, that's very different to a software developer. who needs to act securely, and they need to produce secure code. So you need to make your awareness and training specific to people as well, and help them do the job safely and securely. I'd go on to say again, I made the point earlier about we should be embedding security wherever possible, so people just are able to do their jobs and not have to worry about is it secure or not. It should just be built for them.
Yeah, it's that user experience of security. And it also comes down to, I think, the interfaces that we use. And if we make it, well, there are things hidden in all of those interfaces that lead to security challenges. And the autocomplete list in Outlook is one of those, right? You get the benefit of productivity enhancement, and you get the downside of human error sometimes.
Well, the ICO, again, back to last year, I think the ICO is just flooded now with fabulous people are reporting data breaches, but they tend to be very basic. I've emailed a document to the wrong person thing, I understand. So that sort of thing, you've got to try and use technology wherever possible to take that problem statement away.
I agree. It's the things we do every day, 20 times a day, 100 times a day, that we don't even think about. But there is propensity for error on that are the most damaging sometimes. When you weigh up the total risk for an organization, it's exactly, I got to get other analogies that aren't car analogies, but it's like we don't think twice about getting in our car and driving, but it is one of the most dangerous things we expose ourselves to in our life. And I think there's a lot of parallels with that in security, where we sometimes fear those, blockbuster attacks and, the really, really, I don't know, it's the things that are in the headlines that really manifest themselves in our minds. And I think many boards as well. But those fundamental things that we don't really think twice about, or we think are trivial, but are happening all the time, that can lead to really, really big issues. So when you were a practicing CISO, let's rewind the clock 6 months.
Yeah.
If you had a magic wand, what would you have wished for? And I'll ask it, you got one magic wand to wish for just anything in, helping you in your role as CISO. And then we'll do a second magic wand for specifically related to that human layer security problem and actually securing the person.
The magic away the adversaries.
Yeah, that's a good answer. It's a good answer.
So it's of all the things, I think as technology continues to evolve and improve, the adversaries are doing the same. So the very technology that we are using to help secure the organizations, the adversaries are using to advance their sophistication. So it's an arms race. And often, depending on who the adversary is, well-resourced criminal group or a well-resourced nation state, they have far more capability to develop than we do. So, I'll go with the wave the adversary away if you can.
I think that's a good answer. I didn't foresee that. I should have set up a limitation on what the magic wand can do. And what would it be for solving the human factor in security?
Well, I'd come back to just, we take security as a problem away from the human. So we do, as you rightly say, we put all of the assistive technology in place that people can only do the right thing. They can't do the wrong thing. And I think we'll probably end up having more conversations about when that's likely to occur.
And one of the final things that I wanted to talk about with the time that we have today was there's this concept of the CISO's role and reporting to the board, as you spoke about. Generally, where do you think the average company is on their journey, and how mature are they in terms of actually having a security team report to the board? What do you think needs to happen to get us to where we need to be?
So I would say that in sort of big organizations, there's been a very significant change over the past sort of 5 years, and it's a much sort of more regular conversation with the audit committees and the safety committees, depending on the technology used. So I think actually there's been a fairly big shift. I think as you go down to medium and smaller organizations, it's still very much buried in the technology or the IT department, and is not necessarily a regular risk conversation at the exec team or the board team. So I think it sort of depends. And the other bit of it, I think that sort of somewhat influences it, is the regulatory environment you work in as well. So finance institutions were probably ahead of the game, just because there was so much more regulation in those environments that you had to be, and the board fully understood the regulatory environment and the risk. I think the way into that again is to avoid the technical conversation with the board. So I think, raising the risk conversation in language that the business understands is a way into the conversation with the execs and the board. If you turn up with all of the traditional language we've used in security, traditional technical language, then I just think you'll probably get one shot and you'll never get back there again. So I think there's a bit of work needed actually to sort of bring up the capability actually in CISOs. And I mean, lots of organizations still only have CISOs as a role, right? An adjunct to another piece of technology they own, but we've got to make sure that we're helping them come up with a narrative that helps them secure funding to manage the risk.
Yeah, I guess it's a common challenge, because as you say, you have that deep bench of technical expertise in security, and you also need to be exceptional at communicating all of that to a non-technical, well, sometimes boards are technical audiences, but sometimes non-technical audiences, and you've got to bridge both of those to get the engagement in order to actually get the attention and get the budget, etc.
And we've got to avoid running around saying sky's falling in as well. I mean, I think that we've been probably rightly accused of that in the past as a profession as well. Is that and it's got to be a balanced discussion about risk, business risk. I mean, cyber is just a trigger to another business impacting event. It happens to be slightly different, but actually we've got to talk to it in that language about the risk to the business, not the technology risk. Yeah,
if we're completely risk averse, we won't get anything done, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Simon, thank you so much for your time. It's been so great to have you on the podcast today. We like to close every podcast by asking guests some quick fire questions. So I'm just going to ask you to finish some of these sentences. The best book I ever read was?
From Good to Great, probably.
Who's the author?
And the name's going to escape me now. Jim Collins.
Great, thank you. And the best advice I ever received was?
Best advice I ever received. Do something you're passionate about.
That's great. Simon, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time. I've enjoyed that chat so much.
Great. I really enjoyed the discussion.
And that just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with more human layer security insights in our next episode. But if you can't wait that long, you can visit our blog at tessian.com/blog, where you'll find lots of amazing content, advice, and tips. And if you enjoyed our show, please rate and review it on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.